We are joined by Ric Grenell live to discuss a bunch of topics, Dad, that have come up, as well as what we were talking about the remainder of the show. And also, if you're watching during the breaks, what's going on in China and Taiwan.
Yeah, I want to start, Rick, with Title 42. So the Supreme Court issued an order yesterday, a pretty comprehensive order, saying, A, they're going to grant review, B, limited to whether the states can intervene or not, and C, not get into the merits. That's Congress and the president's decision on what the laws should be. And when they expedited it, they'll keep the stay in place. So Title 42, which when you were in the administration, was put forward as a temporary fix. I mean, when you look at the president's executive orders, when he signed it, it was a temporary fix because of the COVID pandemic. And Justice Gorsuch, and I think rightly so, acknowledges, this isn't a permanent fix. It does give the authority for Customs and Border Patrol to remove unlawful entrants. But the fact is, even with Title 42, if we're all being honest, it's out of control at the border. And when you don't have border security and you don't have orderly process, you have chaos. And right now, Rick, we're seeing chaos.
Look, I think that's where most conservatives are right now, is to say, yes, this was a temporary fix, but we're very concerned that if you remove this temporary fix, you're going to make the situation worse. And we can't make it any worse without literally creating a national security crisis. I think we could argue that right now it is a national security crisis, because we've seen reports of, it's not just Mexicans or people from the Americas trying to come up for a better way of life economically. It's now literally a worldwide phenomenon that you can fly into Mexico City and go up into the border. We've seen people from the Middle East. We've seen people from Moldova. And this is just within the last 24 hours. It's a real national security crisis. And so we don't want to change anything. And so this temporary fix about COVID, I think people are just saying, look, until we get a better policy, let's not make it worse.
It's interesting because Justice Gorsuch, who's a Trump appointee, here's what he said. And I'm going to read from the order because, Rick, I think he's right, actually. He's not saying, by the way, that the states – he doesn't take a position whether the states can intervene or not. He said because that's not really before – that's the only question on the merits they're going to decide. But this is what he says, and I think this was a lesson – this is a lesson to the Biden administration and a lesson to Congress as well. Here's what he said. Courts should not be in the business of perpetuating administrative edicts designed for one emergency only because the elected officials have failed to address a different emergency. We're a court of law, not policymakers of last resort. And I think the failure of the Biden administration here, which is so evident, is when you stop the construction of the border wall and border security, when you stop that, you stopped an orderly process as well. There's a consequence to not following through with the security fence, and that was when you had a security fence, you would have an orderly migration system. When you don't have a security fence, the whole world thinks Title 42 means if it goes, everybody can come in. That's the perception. That's reality.
It's common sense, but common sense does not ever enter Washington, D.C. And so we have a situation where everyone knows that a border fence, a wall, works, but somehow because it's Donald Trump's wall and it was his idea, the Democrats are saying, well, we don't want to do it. And they need to start looking at the policy, not who gets the benefit. And if they would understand, like all Americans realize, that a fence works. And by the way, we should say this, and I've said this before, but the American people shouldn't feel bad about wanting border security. We're the most generous nation in the world when it comes to immigration. We give roughly 1 million people a year the chance to become a U.S. citizen. And the reality is that we have 100 million people that want to come in. If you don't have a border and you don't have policies and a line and rules, then you have chaos. And then you get things like Brexit, which is why the British left the European Union, is because they didn't trust the rest of Europe's immigration policy.
Rick, you were the director of national intelligence, so you dealt with the security issues for our entire country, both domestic and international. And what do you think needs to be done on the border right now? The fence, obviously, to me, is just the starting point of securing it, which would increase order and stability. What would you do?
Look, this is one of the reasons why I constantly tell the American people never to feel bad or selfish or mean-spirited about having policies. Because what I would do is I would enforce the immigration policies. We have rules and we have a border. And we have Border Patrol agents who are there to stop anyone who's cutting the line, trying to jump in front of the line. Now, look, I worked at the State Department for 12 years. I understand that you do have situations where individuals want to come in because they're having, human rights issues or their life is threatened. We have a process for that. And we are, again, very generous and very, we have big hearts when it comes to this at the State Department. But you got to have rules. You can't just enter the country and then say, give me my cell phone. And by the way, I'm now a status where you can't touch me and I can't be removed, because then you're making a mockery of our rules. And no one should feel bad about enforcing this, because we've got a long line of individuals. Think about the people who are waiting in line, who are following the rules. You're not being very kind to them.
No.
You're actually being rude to them. And it's immoral to somehow create one system where people have to wait in line and follow the rules, and then somehow allow this whole other group to break the law, enter the country, ignore the rules, jump in front of the line. It's not being fair. And so I would just say, if I were in charge, I would enforce the rules and constantly articulate the fact that we have a line, wait in line, and that's not being rude. If you want to somehow claim a status as seeking asylum, we have a process for that as well. Don't break the rules and just jump into the country.
Absolutely. We got a lot of calls coming in specifically related to what's going to happen over the next few months as the Republicans in Congress everything starts to move. Let's go to Gwen, who's calling in the state of Georgia on line 3. Gwen, welcome.
I just wanted to know, could the incoming Republican Congress allocate money towards the border wall and finish it and, get more patrols down there?
So the incoming
security
Congress,
in general. Yeah, what can they do?
Yeah, well, a bunch of them were in our office. We had a reception for them last month. And I would say it's fair to say, Rick, that the incoming members understand that part of their election success was we got to have border security, and they want to allocate money to protecting the border. And I mean, you've got Congresswoman Tenney's bill, which says, hey, you know what? Instead of giving the IRS money for 87,000 new IRS agents, which would double the number of IRS agents, by the way. I mean, just think about that for a moment. You're talking about a fiasco. I mean, there's one. Allocate that money to the border, and let's get Border Patrol agents. So you do have Congress, at least members of the House, starting to say we could reallocate budgetary items to get more protection for our border.
It's such a great question, and it seems like a common sense question. It's one that everybody outside of Washington, D.C. wants to know. But the reality is the political will of the Democrats is that they won't spend the money because they don't want to give Donald Trump and the Republicans a win. So they're going to do everything they can to ignore this and pretend like they need some sort of different solution. But Glenn is right that we must have a border. And when Republicans begin to say, let's spend money on the border, that's the right thing to do. But I don't believe that the Biden administration will do it. There is a tiny bit of good news in that Kristen Sinema and some other Democrats are beginning to complain. I think they should have been complaining 2 years ago. They're a little late to the game. But we now are seeing cracks in the Democrats, and they're beginning to complain about this disastrous policy.
Rick, really quick here, we got less than a minute and a half, but China sent 71 warplanes, 7 ships towards Taiwan in the last 24 hours. What are we looking at there?
We're looking at American weakness. I mean, they're reading what's happening. We see Kim Jong-un beginning to create conflict to get some attention. I just think we have to have a better Secretary of State who can have these meetings, diplomatic meetings, have ideas and solutions before we just immediately delve into a military conflict. We just have this system right now in the Biden administration where everything goes immediately to a military conflict, and there's no thought to avoid these conflicts beforehand.
All right, we're going to take your, Rick, we appreciate you being with us. Ric Grenell, of course, Senior Advisor on International Matters, Global Security, and former Director of National Intelligence, part of our team here at the ACLJ.